Hello, Space Junkies, and welcome to a special in-person, quasi-live version of What a Piece of Junk, the Star Wars podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network. I am your host, Scott Bultman, and with me at my nerd cave in the flesh is our very own Gooey Chewy, Mr. Dave Filcloni, the man of 1,000 nicknames, Nathan Miracle. Nathan, I'm so glad you're at my house.
Me too. I was passing by this way. I went to go see my father for Father's Day, and your house is actually on the way back home. So stop by to pick up some stuff I accidentally left last time I was here, but also to record this episode of What a Piece of Junk.
And to help yourself to some of my electrons by plugging up your car to my level 2 charger in the garage, which
Very helpful
no problem
for getting home. Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise you're not going to make it. Actually, you probably could make it, but
yeah.
you know. Anyway, Father's Day, of course, is what's happening today. We're recording this on June the 16th in the year of our Lord 2024 at 7:30-ish on the East Coast. And what an appropriate time to talk about this episode of The Acolyte. We'll be discussing Star Wars The Acolyte Episode 3, Destiny. The question of fathers was actually kind of a big story point.
Or rather, fathers or the lack thereof.
Yes, exactly, the lack of fathers. So we'll talk about that as we dive into discussion of the show. But if you have not watched The Acolyte Episode 3, then stop the podcast right now because we're going to spoil the heck out of it. But geez, if you're a denizen of the internet, or a netizen, as we once called ourselves in the 1990s, you probably know a whole bunch about The Acolyte Episode 3 already, because the discourse has been hot and heavy. Hot. No, maybe that was a fire reference. Ooh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Too soon?
Too soon. Way too soon.
But it was 16 years ago.
Yeah, and also last week.
Yeah. Anyway, we're going to jump right into it. So we're doing this live, as they say. So I've got the show notes on my phone. So if you see me looking at my phone, it's not that I'm texting or posting on Threads or Facebook during the show. It's that
I am.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
It's that I'm reading the show notes. So we're going to jump into the 5 questions about Star Wars The Acolyte Episode 3, Destiny. So, Nathan, what did you like best about this episode?
I think the thing I like best about this episode is a topic that we kind of discussed last week, and that is the Jedi are light side, but they're not always in the right. They're not always doing good things, and we see them in this episode kind of manipulating the situation. They're doing some spying, they're doing some lying. Oh yeah, no, we accidentally got here. We don't even know where we are.
We thought this planet was uninhabited.
Or that you have kids that didn't have that mark this morning when we were spying on you.
Right. This mark is new.
They're not very good at lying, but they do it. So it was neat to see that kind of wrinkle with the Jedi. Yes, they are light side, but that doesn't always mean they're doing the right thing.
Yes, exactly. My favorite part of this episode was the Night Sisters involved, the witches, if you will, if they don't want to call themselves Night Sisters, were talking about the thread. Like, they brought back that terminology, because I believe we saw Dathomirian witches talk about the thread.
Yeah, they also talk about threads.
So that's pretty cool. I enjoyed that we're having that thread connecting the two coven of witches. And I liked it, maybe it was just me, assuming, but when Mother Anastasia was trying to teach Mae and Osha about the thread, she kind of made a little one appear as an object lesson. But Mae and Osha were horrible students. They were busy fighting with each other instead of, paying attention to what their mom was trying to teach them, or in this case, what their teacher was trying to teach them. But I enjoyed the fact that we have that continuing terminology, and we're not trying to reinvent all wheels by coming up with whole new words for the way that the witches deal with the Force. And I like that we've had Force witches doing similar powers to the ones that we saw with the Night Sisters in the Clone Wars cartoon, and Force powers similar to what we saw all the way back in 1985 with the Ewok Adventures, where we saw Shiral doing Force witch things and was even called a Force witch.
Yeah, so witches aren't just for Dathomir.
Right.
We have witches all over Star Wars, apparently. And we're finding out more about a different sect of witches because they're not on Dathomir.
Right.
They're not calling themselves Dathomirian witches. So I think it is a different
And I'm pretty sure that
different line of witches.
these witches here in the Acolyte didn't even call themselves Night Sisters, did they?
Nothing referred to them as Night Sisters.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that they might not evolve into Night Sisters, or they might get totally wiped out. And Night Sisters,
it's pretty dang close at the end of episode 3.
It is, yeah.
So, yeah. All right, well, question number 2. I'll go first this time. What did you like least about this episode? I didn't like that we didn't get some definitive answer to how did Mother Anastasia and most of the rest of the witches die. I don't think the explosion was enough of an impact in the room where they were standing to kill them all. I mean, almost instantaneously, it seems. They always went down, blah, 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 blah. So, and I think that there's a reason that we didn't get a definitive answer, but it still bugs me that now I have to wait till next week.
Yeah, now I am hoping that is a wait till next week thing. If we never get a definitive answer, then that will retroactively become my least favorite thing about this episode. The reason I didn't list that is because I think we will get an answer to that. I'm not even 100% sure that it's the fire that killed them.
Yeah, I don't think it is.
But I think we're not supposed to know what killed them at this point, and that's a mystery for later in the season.
Yeah.
It's very important, I think, not to rush to judgment on things, because things can get explained throughout the season. If you go, oh, well, this is terrible because we don't have an explanation right now, well, you're jumping the gun, maybe.
You mean I shouldn't assume that the witches that are raising twins that are gifted in the Force are necessarily evil right as I arrive on their planet?
Yeah, you shouldn't assume that right as you arrive on their planet, but when they start doing evil things, then you can kind of figure out that they are evil. They are very evil.
Touché. So, speaking of when they start doing evil things, we'll move on to question number 3.
Well, I got to answer mine.
Oh, right.
What was
sorry.
my least favorite thing?
Oh, sorry. I thought your least favorite thing was also that we didn't get the answer to how they...
No,
okay,
that's not my least favorite thing. My least favorite thing is we did not see Kilnaka do enough stuff. We saw the Wookiee Jedi, and he's out there fixing what looks like a prototype bark speeder that we see way more of in the prequels and in the Clone Wars cartoon. But that's pretty much all he does. And we were teased Master Kilnaka in the second episode. We ended with, oh yes, we know where the Wookiee Jedi lives.
And he crunched that guy's gun with his bare hands.
Yeah, and that's
his Wookiee hands.
That's kind of it, though. I want more Wookiee Jedi.
Okay, that's fair. If anyone was going to say I want more Wookiee Jedi, it would be you. And I agree, actually. I, too, would like more Wookiee Jedi. All right, question number 3. What changes did you notice about the larger Star Wars galaxy? Longtime listeners will note we have modified this question for the Acolyte since it takes place chronologically the farthest back in time of any Star Wars streaming series so far. So, Nathan?
Well, there is the big one, which we all thought that Anakin Skywalker was the only person to ever be conceived through the Force and without a father, and we thought that's part of what made him such a big deal. And it's heavily implied, not outright stated, but heavily implied in this episode,
have a theory
that the twins were created through dark side magic. We don't know that for 100% certain, so again, trying not to rush to judgment, but if they were, that's a big change. But I don't think that takes away from Anakin. Anakin is still the chosen one.
Yeah.
He still has that place of importance. He's still the guy who fell to the dark side and then became redeemed and took out Darth Sidious. So I don't think the fact that, well, the presumption that he's no longer the only one who was conceived that way takes anything away from him.
So, I agree. Even if that turns out to be how the twins were created, which, again, I'm not 100% convinced that that's what happened. There's a lot of things that could piss off the Jedi, as Mother Coral said.
True.
She's like, if they find out how you made them, the Jedi will be very upset, or words to that effect. It doesn't have to be just the Force was used. It could be something completely different, which we'll talk about in question 4. So, yes, that was your answer for question 3. Is that
Yes.
the connection to
That
Force
is
conception?
the big one. there's not a lot else other than we already talked about the fact that we've got the witches, and they're not Dathomir witches, or at least they haven't said anything about Dathomir. But I don't know how much of a change that is. It's more of just an addition. There's often questions about continuity in Star Wars of, well, we didn't see this or we didn't see that. Doesn't that break continuity? And the answer is generally no.
Right. It does not break continuity.
It's a big galaxy, and different stories can focus on different things. So it's not continuity breaking that we've never heard of these people. They just weren't ever important in any of the other stories that we've heard.
I think for me, the major addition or change is that the Jedi not only gathered up Force-sensitive children throughout the Republic because their parents would send them off to the temple when they were of age, but they went outside the Republic to do almost recruitment scouting missions. There was some discourse on the social media this past week that the behavior of the Jedi here reminded people of Christian missionaries back in the day, especially Canadian ones that would go out to the native population, kidnap their children and take them to Christian schools to, teach them how to not be heathens. And of course that happened in Canada, and it was a terrible tragedy.
It was not okay.
It's not okay.
We are not endorsing this.
And like centuries before that, it happened in other countries as well, as the church went about being all, if English was good enough for the Lord Jesus Christ, it's good enough for these children. Obviously, Jesus did not speak English, and the King James Version of the Bible is not the original script for anyone who happens to think that. So I could definitely see that perspective on the way the Jedi are acting here. They almost essentially come to this planet after presumably Force visions about these twins and the impact that they're having on the balance between the dark side and the light side. And they are on a mission, if you will, to get these children and in their mind help them. Jedi Master Call is very much about wanting to help the... Wait, did I say Call? Saul.
Saul.
Yeah, Saul.
Like
Jedi
sun.
Master Saul. Yes, like the sun.
Yeah, and we saw moons.
Yes.
Like twin moons.
Oh man, the planetary, the lunar alignment for the two moons was cool, and it was kind of like the logo for the show. I was like, this is really good graphic arts direction here. My artist wife was very impressed by this. Anyway, the Jedi think that they have come to help. Now, I did ask Derek for his input on the episode, and he didn't have a whole lot to say because he's very busy this week, so he sends his regrets for not being on this podcast. But he was of the opinion that in this case, the Jedi were pretty much in the wrong, because if they had not arrived to try and force the issue, that maybe all of the witches here would not have been killed at this moment in time. And I'm inclined to agree with him, especially once we realize Mother Anastasia is correct in her assessment that Brendok is not part of the Republic. It is funny that you tell Trinity from The Matrix that she's out of her jurisdiction. Anybody who saw the beginning of The Matrix will find that joke humorous. Agent Smith shows up to try to capture Trinity, and the cop involved is all, whoa, this is not your jurisdiction. And of course, Agent Smith dispatches him. The idea that if the Jedi had left them alone, there wouldn't have been this particular tragedy, I absolutely agree with. However, I am not of the mind that there wouldn't have been a future tragedy from the result of having these twins become invested in the thread and the Night Sisters' way of dealing with the Force. Now, we have seen Force witches that use the light side back in Tales of the Empire, when we saw Morgan Elsbeth's story. As a young witch herself, she encountered a whole different tribe of witches on her home planet that she was there with the other Night Sisters. And they were using the light side of the Force. They didn't have weapons. They didn't, do as many rituals. They didn't have the facial tattoos.
They were big into knowledge and defense.
Yes.
Which is the light side,
yes.
Knowledge and defense.
And so Mother Anastasia, Mother Coral, and the other witches here don't seem to be as interested in the light side version of the Force. We'll talk in a few minutes about the way that the twins may have been created, but definitely you can tell that the Night Sisters involved here, the witches involved here, are on the dark side, in my opinion, because when Osha and Mae get ready for the Jedi test, Mother Anastasia says to them, whatever is in your heart, you must say the opposite. She's very much telling them to lie. Now, some folks might see that as a lie of necessity because they don't want their family to be broken up, so they need to fail on purpose and therefore lie. But anybody who's telling you to deny what is in your heart, to lie on purpose, that is of the dark side. The dark side is often about deceit. Now, not always. We have talked about how Sith don't usually tell lies, but I think this is another indication that the Darksiders here are not Sith. So they are totally cool with lying. Sith don't lie, but these ladies are not adherents of the Sith. Even though older Mae definitely is when she and Khmer do the Sith code.
Yes, there's definitely Sith influence on older Mae. I don't know if she's a straight up Sith. She may be something a bit more like Asajj Ventress, who thought she was a Sith until her master informed her, no, there's only two Sith, and you are not one of them.
I often feel like now we're going to be able to retroactively refer to Ventress during the Clone Wars as an Acolyte.
I think so, yes.
She's not an apprentice. She's not a Sith apprentice or a Sith master, of course. She feels like she would be like Mae here, an Acolyte.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think she is an Acolyte retroactively. Now, to me, the thing that really impressed on me that these are dark side, her mother told her that it's your choice, you have to choose your path when it came to the Jedi. But before that, she was perfectly willing to say, no, you want to be a witch.
Right. I'm going to make this decision for you.
Think you don't want to be a witch, but you want to be a witch. Oh, you want to be a Jedi? Well, you don't have to do that. You're very much into controlling your children's destiny as long as it is the destiny that you want for them.
Yes.
And the moment they try to go elsewhere, you're like, no, you don't really want to consider that. Yeah, you're right that the Sith don't lie. They don't straight up lie.
Right.
They do manipulate.
Yes, they might lie by omission, as Spock once said.
They tell you the truth from the point of view that they want you to understand it.
The truth from a certain point of view? Well, that sounds like some other organization I've heard of.
Yeah, well, the Jedi oftentimes just straight up lie.
Yeah.
Why, no, we don't know that you have children here, but please bring them out.
Your father was a cunning warrior and the best star pilot I've ever seen until a man named Darth Vader betrayed and murdered him. I mean, it's kind of true.
From a certain point of view.
But it also is a handy way to explain the situation if you want to make sure Luke doesn't know who his father is so that he can go ahead and kill Darth Vader for you.
Yep.
Yeah.
The Jedi have always been manipulative as well.
Yeah. And they are a little bit manipulative in this episode, too.
Oh, definitely.
You can certainly see, though, that Master Saul is about that paternal instinct, if I may continue our somewhat strained Father's Day analogy here. After the tragedy where Osha's family appears to have all died, so I've seen some people online saying Mother Corel was not seen amongst the corpses.
Ooh,
now, I haven't gone back to, go
that.
frame by frame to see if that's true, but that would be really interesting if it was the case. Because Mother Corel very much seemed to be more focused on, we got to fight the Jedi. We can't let them come and take our daughters, etc., etc. And, I definitely respect her desire to protect her children, however those children may have come about. So that brings us to question number 4, at which point I'm going to once again quote everyone's favorite line from Ye Old Rise of Skywalker, from Dominic Monaghan's character Beaumont. And that is, of course, how do we think Mother Anastasia created the twins? Sith magic, cloning, dark science. Nathan?
Secrets only the Sith knew.
Yes. Nathan, what is your idea? And then I'll say my crazy crackpot theory.
Well, my idea is that it was really dumb to give that line to somebody who we don't have any way of knowing that he knows that is what happened.
This is what happens when you're friends with J.J. Abrams.
Yes, yeah. Which I love the actor; he's great. Love Merry in Lord of the Rings, but how does he know this? There's no reason he should know this. it would have been much better if Palpatine were the one to say all that.
Yeah, or even the disembodied voice of Vader, because we get
Could
that
be.
moment
Yeah,
earlier in Rise of
absolutely.
Skywalker where he's talking to Kylo Ren.
Yeah, if Kylo Ren was like, so how are you here? Dark magic, secrets only the Sith knew. And by the way, I'm a Sith, so I knew them.
Right. I've kept it going for the
Or
longest time.
perhaps Beaumont is a Sith. Anyways,
Darth Mary.
as it relates to this episode of The Acolyte, there are several possibilities for how they created these children. Now, the obvious one, the one that seems to be implied,
They're kind of hitting us over the head with this one.
yes, is that they use the dark side of the Force to create life, much the same as we all thought that Palpatine might have done to create Anakin.
Thank you, Charles Soule, for your comic book that made everybody think that. But then also thank you, Charles Soule, for coming on social media and explaining that's totally not what I meant.
Yes, turns out that was a fear that Darth Vader had, was that perhaps Palpatine had done this, but it turns out the Force itself created Anakin. And that may be the part of the difference here, is there wasn't a person manipulating the Force to create Anakin. It was the Force itself. But that is one possibility, that they manipulated the dark side of the Force. Another possibility is that they created them in, say, the old-fashioned way, but by manipulating a donor, shall we say.
What?
Jedi mind tricks.
Women seducing a man in order to get pregnant? No, come on. That never happens.
Anyway, that's a possibility. I don't have any evidence for that. It's just a possibility. I don't really think that's what's happening. I think it's more likely the first one, but you had a different idea, and I'd like to hear more about that.
So we're all reacting to Mother Corel saying to Mother Anastasia, I carried them. Mother Anastasia says, I created them. Mother Corel says, yeah, but when the Jedi find out how you created them, it could be trouble. What if Mother Anastasia just used some highly illegal cloning technology to take her own DNA? I will refrain from the obvious ethnic similarities between the twins and Mother Anastasia.
Just to interject, Star Wars is also the property that has a genetically identical clone of Jango Fett who is female.
Yes.
So I'm not too concerned about the obvious ethnic issues with saying that this is a clone of this particular person.
Right. And so she used the cloning technology to get her own DNA, make copies, and then had Mother Corel be the surrogate mom, essentially. And so it's not lost on me that there's been a lot of discussion in the real world about in vitro fertilization and whether or not that's going to remain legal as the time that this episode came out. Wow. But also, I think if this turns out to be about illegal cloning technology, first of all, it'll be a nice, here's mud in your eye to all the crazy crackpot theories on YouTube right now about this ruins Anakin's story. Yeah, well, it doesn't if they're clones, and it doesn't anyway, but certainly it defeats your whole argument if they're not made by the Force, but by science. So, and I think that at this point in the Republic, the idea of making clones is probably 100% illegal, because there's a really good chance that it was illegal during the Clone Wars, because Kamino is not part of the Republic. It was an independent contractor from an independent system. And Dexter Jetster, the greatest diner owner in all of Star Wars, is talking to Obi-Wan about it in Attack of the Clones, and he says, cloners. He's not happy about it. That's not exactly a compliment the way Dexter says it, right? It's more of a pejorative.
He compliments their skill. He says, darn good ones, too, but
it's almost like he has this air about him of, they're cheating because they're clones.
yeah, they're not doing it the right way. Mm-hmm. And it is emergency powers that Palpatine gets. So that might imply that, yes, cloning's normally illegal, but my emergency powers allows me to do what needs to be done to win this war that I
can spend money.
Manipulated the Republic to get into.
Sure, but we're not going to put that part in the speech. I'm going to spend money on stuff that was outlawed by the Geneva Convention. Like, we need this mustard gas. Now, we can't buy it from any legitimate place, but we're going to buy it from some other nation that's not part of the League of Nations. That, if I may get really, really historical on you, not part of the League of Nations because they still make weapons of mass destruction in the form of gas. Or in this case, they make armies of mass destruction in the form of clones. I add clone army to my list of super weapons that have really wrecked the galaxy throughout the history of Star Wars. Because we got Sith temples, we got planet killers, we got Death Stars, we got planet shields, we got clone army.
Yeah, it's just a lot more indirect than something like the Death Star.
Right.
Where you're literally blowing up a planet. In this case, you're sending in people, but they're people that are bred for war. Almost like the Jem'Hadar from the Dominion in Star Trek. They are bred for one purpose. Fight.
Exactly. And just like the Jem'Hadar, eventually some of the clones decide that they're on the wrong side. Mm-hmm. And some of them have genetic mutations that become, a little more advantageous. They made a whole show about that. It's called The Bad Batch. You guys should check it out.
You should. Yeah. And then come to What a Piece of Junk and watch our commentary on it.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, so my crazy crackpot theory is Mother Anastasia did in fact break the law. The Jedi are going to be angry about it, but it's not because she used the Force to impregnate Mother Coral. Because the way Mother Coral said, I carried them, not you gave them to me to carry. It's like we had the twins, then you put them in me so I could carry them. Now, granted, that could all still happen through the Force. I get it.
It could, yeah.
But it just feels more like, here's the test tube, and now I'm going to inject this into your body so that you can carry the babies.
This would also give us a link to somehow Palpatine returned, which it seems like a lot of Star Wars these days is connecting to that.
Yeah.
Somehow trying to explain, hey, this is how.
We all left the theater from Part 9 going, what? And, it's kind of like in Episode 4 when Obi-Wan's all the Clone Wars. And we're like, what are the Clone Wars?
What
and it took us a good 20 years to, or even longer, to almost a little bit longer.
It took 20 years to get to the Phantom Menace, a few more years to get to the start of the Clone Wars, and then several more years to really get a good grasp on what happened in the Clone Wars, because I would argue we didn't really get a good grasp of what happened in the Clone Wars until the cartoons.
Yeah.
Because the movies are, and the Clone Wars started, and now they ended.
Yeah.
Like what happened
Episode
during?
2, it happens. Episode 3, we're done.
Yeah. So with the idea in mind that we want to tie everything into how Palpatine came back, and we seem to be doing that through cloning with Mount Tantus in the Bad Batch.
And all those Snokes in a jar in Rise of Skywalker.
Yeah, so cloning seems to be a big part of that. We could have kind of the first elements of that, and maybe the Sith person, or maybe they're not Sith, but the person with the red lightsaber that we saw, who might be one of the witches. Don't know. Still putting money on
Khmer. Darth Khmer.
But this could be kind of where they started that whole idea of, hey, why don't we just clone ourselves?
What if that's Mother Coral wearing that mask? Because her face is horribly scarred from the explosion and whatnot. And she wears the mask so that Mae won't know who she is.
All right, that's now my number 2. Darth Khmer is number 1. That's my number 2.
Yeah. Now I'm really going to have to go back and watch Destiny again to see if Mother Coral's corpse is, conspicuous in its absence from the pile of dead witches. Anyway, but yeah, there's our crazy question 4 stuff. So tune in next episode of the podcast to find out what really happened.
Yeah, and why we are totally and utterly wrong.
Yeah, we're completely wrong. It was definitely Immaculate Conception through the Force, the dark side specifically, and I was all off base on the whole cloning thing. Sure.
I'd be kind of disappointed at this point.
Yeah, right. I really want it. I want that commentary about IVF and how, we shouldn't necessarily tell people they couldn't do that. Anyway, that's a whole different kind of podcast. Question number 5, Nathan, what you got?
All right. Well, this question, we've already discussed it a little bit before the podcast, so I know what our answer is going to be. This is really more of a topic of conversation. Do we think that we are going to see the events of this episode again, but from a different point of view?
I will be disappointed if we don't, because no less a luminary than Eric Walker, friend of the show, and Mace Tawani, the OG Mace in the Star Wars universe, was posting on Adam O'Brien's comments about whether or not he enjoyed the Acolyte. And Eric had a really great point. He's like, we didn't really get to see how all the witches died. He's like, it doesn't make much sense that they would all be defeated seemingly so easily. And then he gave this great answer about, this would be like if when I was on Endor, we did it blah, 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 instead of having me have to fight the big monster. And I'm like, it's so cool that he can just be all, well, when I had to fight a Star Wars monster. Anyway, and he was very gracious and be like, listen, I understand every actor is different. This can be a lot to do with the writing. And of course, any director is going to influence the scene in a way that they do to create their art. And Eric was very respectful of everyone else having their own process. And he also understands you cannot compare 1980s filmmaking to 21st century filmmaking. And thirdly, but fourthly, whatever, additionally, this is a TV show and not a movie. So that's a whole thing too, right? But he makes a good point. There wasn't enough meat on the bone to explain how this tragedy occurred from this episode. Because I feel like this episode is from Osha's perspective. Often to the point where after Mae sets the fire in the castle, which I love that the Night Sister or the witches have come and taken over this existing castle.
Yes.
I think part of the reason that the generator thing, reactor core, is in such bad shape is this place is old. Anyway, after Mae sets the fire, she goes off to do other stuff, and we only see what Osha is experiencing while Osha is locked in that room. Up to the point where we only see Osha hotwire the door to get out of the ventilation shaft. Apparently, it is code in the Star Wars galaxy that if you have a reactor core, you must have a ventilation shaft that leads directly to it.
Oh, absolutely.
Because
that's just standard
precisely what
Star
happens
Wars engineering
here
101.
in this castle. Is she opens the ventilation shaft and runs down the hallway, the shaft, to the reactor core, where her sister is already there, and we get the classic, wait, this is Star Trek, and this is the bridge on Verdia 3. Clang, 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 no! And then Master Saul has to save her. I really thought Master Saul was going to use the Force to grab her, like he did in Episode 1. But
what is with Osha falling off places where they don't have handrails? We need some sort of occupational safety and hazard education.
The bridges that they were on, though, that Osha and Mae were on in this episode, did have handrails. That's probably why they failed.
Oh, that makes sense.
You have to build your bridge no handrails in the Star Wars galaxy, or else it will collapse. Too much weight. They can't handle the extra weight. Anyway, so, no, I very much think that if not this coming episode 4, at least 5, we will see this same occurrence from Mae's perspective. Or perhaps from one of the Jedi's perspective.
I think it will be Mae's perspective, and here's my rationale on that. We only see one of the twins taking the test. Mm-hmm. We only see Osha taking the test. We don't see Mae taking the test. I think we will see these events again, and I think we're going to see Mae and how she responds to the test. And I think that's going to enlighten us a lot as to her perspective and what she's all about. Because she's also going in with the idea of, I am going to lie and just say the opposite of whatever I see.
Say the opposite of what's in my heart, yeah.
Yeah.
I had the greatest meme about that test that I posted on the What a Piece of Junk Facebook group. Yes. It was Master Saul is sitting there, he's holding the little iPad dealy bop, and he's like, okay, Osha, tell me what you see. And Osha's in the next frame, and she says, I see someone who is a really great swimmer. And the picture on Master Saul's display is Kino Loy from Andor, who very much could not swim. And Master Saul goes, did someone tell you to lie on this test?
So we've talked about Meriadoc Brendok, and now we're talking about Golem.
Oh my gosh, the Lord of the Rings connections continue. Yes, Darth Beaumont. That's my new headcanon. The reason that he knew about Sith science and sorcery is he secretly is a Sith.
It's the only explanation.
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, so whatever the case may be about Question 5, we'll find out next week or maybe the week after, because again, it may not be.
Yeah, I'm thinking we'll have an interlude. We'll see something that sets up the fact that we would see that from Mae's perspective. So I think we'll see a Mae-centric episode leading into her recollection of these events.
Maybe it's even going to be a situation where Mae argues with her sister about what happened that night. And that's when we realize that they have two different perspectives about what happened that night on Brendok. Because Osha will be like, it's because all our family died from the fire that you caused. And Mae will be like, me? You're the one that, because at the end of Destiny, we see Mae standing by the Tree of Life. I'm sorry, the tree that's in the garden that their creator forbid them to go to. Oh, wait. Anyway, we see...
We have seen that tree before, by the way.
Have we?
We have. It is... I know we've seen it at a minimum in the last arc of the Clone Wars before we got to Season 7, when Yoda is tempted by the dark side. He sees a vision of himself in a courtyard with Count Dooku, not Darth Tyrannus.
Whoa.
And Qui-Gon Jinn is there because he didn't die in this, because he's having a vision of kind of the ideal,
alternate
an alternate world where the Clone Wars have never happened.
Oh.
Qui-Gon Jinn is still alive. Count Dooku is still a Jedi, and he's talking about, this time when I fell into a pack of Gundarks with my Padawan Qui-Gon Jinn, and that's happening at that courtyard with that tree in the background.
Whoa. Well, because I thought that this particular tree, I was joking around about it being the Tree of Life, or the Tree of the Knowledge of Good and Evil, because, it really is like this really fancy tree amongst the rest of the garden, and their creator, Mother Coral, shows up to be like, I told you never to come to this tree. I was like, could we be any more blatantly obvious that the girls are sitting? By the way, they're doing this before the Jedi arrive on Brendok. I just want to point that out. I thought that was the Bunta tree, from which...
I think we're talking about two different trees.
Okay. This is the tree I'm talking about is the one where the girls are playing with the little butterfly-looking things.
That's not the tree I'm talking about.
Very well. That is definitely not the tree you were talking about.
No, I'm talking about the tree once they get back to Coruscant.
Oh. Yeah, it's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, okay, we're talking about two different trees. But when they get back to Coruscant, there's a tree there. We've seen that tree before. We've never seen the Bunta trees before.
The Bunta tree at the beginning,
that's
where the
new.
girls are playing with the butterflies things. And Mae is like gonna do the thing where the creepy little kid pulls the wings off the fly, but with the Force. And Osha's like, "Don't do this, Mae. You always do that."
See, and that I feel like is a perfect example of a place where they could have a different perspective. Osha is assuming that Mae's going to torture this butterfly.
Yeah.
And if we see it from Mae's perspective, I bet you Mae's going to see that Osha's doing something to the butterfly, and she's just rescuing it or
Well,
something.
see, but Osha says you always do that, implying that Mae has done this several times before to these bugs or whatever, birds or whatever they are.
Yeah, but
Which makes
that
me
could
feel
just
like
be an
she's like-
assumption on Osha's part.
Maybe. But I
Well,
feel like
but
she's
the-
watched
the-
her
the-
sister do this before.
This is why we need to see it from Mae's perspective. To see if Osha's just assuming that she's going to do something evil to the butterfly, or if she actually is intending to do that.
Because I got the Damien kid from the Omen vibe here, that Mae was going to use her Force powers to pull the wings off the butterfly, like Damien was doing all these horrible things as a little kid in the Omen, because he's the devil. That was to me a quite blatant, this is the dark side twin, this is the light side twin. I've seen some people online complaining that the writing for this whole one dark side twin, one light side twin is hackneyed and contrived and, total cliche. And I'm like, yeah, but in Star Wars?
It's Star Wars. Star Wars was built on cliches.
Yeah, there's that too. But we also haven't really had a dark side twin, light side twin in live action before.
Right.
Now,
yeah,
we have had it in the old EU. And perhaps this is, once again, the way that Lucasfilm in 2024 is reintroducing that concept from the old EU, like they've done with Thrawn and so on and so forth.
Could be, yeah. I think the only dark side, light side twin pairings we had was in Visions.
Yeah.
Which is decidedly not canon. And that particular episode of Visions is one of my least favorite.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
There was a lot of really weird stuff about that one.
Yeah.
Let's just skip over that.
Yeah. Anyway, be that as it may, I think that we will see a different perspective on the events of that fire the night that occurred on Brendok. I'm kind of like Nathan, though. I think we're going to have an interlude. Episode 4 won't be it, but Episode 5 will be when that happens. And whenever it happens, you can be sure that we're going to talk about it ad infinitum here on What a Piece of Junk. But we're not the only show that you can check out on the Fandom Podcast Network. We've got a bunch of other shows, too. And here to tell us about them is Kevin.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blooded Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our fandom flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek and the Orville Show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
All right, thanks so much, Kevin. So this episode of the podcast is going to be a little shorter than normal because, well, it's, a lot harder to do live. And we don't have Derek here to tell us, we're all a bunch of morons. But we will talk to you about Derek's favorite part of the show, and that is what Star Wars shirts are we wearing this week. I'm kicking it old school with my Japanese poster for the original Star Wars, A New Hope, back from 1978 or so when it came out in Japan. And I wore this because, one, it's a nice thin shirt and it's pretty warm already here in North Carolina in June. And two, it reminds me of 1980s Star Wars filmmaking. So, of course, I referenced Chiral from the Ewok Adventure and, Battle for Endor, one of the original implementation of Force Witch. And so I love that idea to remind people who are ranting and raving online about how this is some crazy new thing. No, it predates when many of those particular commentators were born. Not all of them, but some of them.
As a matter of fact, the Dathomiri witches were not the first witches.
That's right.
And they weren't created for the Clone Wars either. Nope. They were in a novel well before the Clone Wars.
Yep.
The Courtship of Princess Leia, if I recall correctly.
That is correct, yes.
Yeah. So you're kicking it old school, but I'm going new school because I have a brand new shirt. This shirt is so new that this past week I was at Target with my girlfriend. I saw this shirt and I thought, oh man, I told her, oh man, Scott would probably really love this shirt.
I may be going to mug him before he leaves my house.
It's like a Hawaiian shirt, but it's Star Wars. It's got stormtroopers. It's got the Millennium Falcon or Aluminum Falcon, depending on your point of view. Darth Vader, X-Wing, all sorts of Star Wars stuff.
TIE Fighters, R2-D2.
Yeah, there's a Yoda head over here. It's great.
Chewbacca is hanging around.
Now, I looked at it, said Scott would love this.
And he's right.
But you know what? I'm not going to get it. And then secretly went back to Target later in the week without her. So she doesn't know I bought this shirt. She might find out if she watches this episode.
You look really good in the shirt. I'm sure Andrea is going to appreciate that you went ahead and bought it.
I'm sure. But I also decided I like this shirt. So I bought it for me, and they didn't have two in the proper sizes. So, sorry.
Must head to Target.com. Actually, speaking of buying shirts and stuff on the internet, if you guys want your own cool What a Piece of Junk t-shirt, mouse pad, phone case, coffee mug, etc., please just head over to tpublic.com and search up Fandom Podcast Network in the search bar, and you can find merchandise from our show or any of the other really great shows that Kevin talked about in the commercial break. But speaking of the internet, where can people find the show out there on the internet, Nathan? Now, we're doing this live, so did you memorize it, or are you going to cheat and look at your phone?
Why, I have totally memorized it. Please ignore my eyes darting down to my phone. Hey! All right. You know what? You can find us on lots of different places. Pretty much anywhere you stream podcasts. On the Podbean app, we are fpnet.podbean. .com.
So close. So really, .com? That's the part you had a problem with? Jeez.
I
Anyway.
can't remember if it was net or com. Anyways, yes. So we're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. That's my favorite. But you know what? I'm really liking Spotify now because I now have Apple CarPlay. I can listen to us in the car on the way to work, which is kind of weird, but you can do it.
You can listen to us in your car on Amazon Prime Music as well, which is how I've been listening to the show and other FPNet shows. Because it's like Nathan said, any place that you cast your pods, you can find us.
Yes, iHeartRadio, that's another one. Stitcher, all of these great places. You can email us, whatapieceofjunkpod@gmail.com. On Twitter, Kyle runs that. We're at What Wars, or do we call that X now? Regardless, it's the same place. On Instagram, the entire Fandom Podcast Network is at Fandom Podcast Network. So we don't have a specific one just for us, but the whole network you can find there. On Apple Podcasts, and really anywhere that allows you to leave a review, which Spotify does, by the way, you can leave us a review. Those reviews are great. For one, it helps other people find us. It also lets us know, what do you like, what do you not like, what can we do better, because we want to do what is best for you. We want to make sure that we're not going against what our hearts say. we are not just going to go, yes, Kino Loy, a great swimmer.
Did someone tell you to fail this test? So great. But yeah, and 5-star reviews are important for another reason. I mean, we have all these Force orphans from that the Jedi have confiscated that we have to feed. So please help us to feed these Force orphans by giving us 5-star reviews.
You can't feed them with just fire.
No. When you do feed them just fire, they're like that little girl at the Jedi Temple at the beginning of the Acolyte who is all, I see fire. And the Jedi are like, make note in her permanent record.
I see peace. I see tranquility. I see fire.
Yep. Send her to Jedi cooking school to use fire for good. All right. So anyway, please check us out on all those places and leave a review, and we will greatly appreciate it. But until next time, we want to thank you all for joining us and for listening to the show. And please, as always, remember to respect each other and respect each other's fandom. All right, Nathan, punch it!